For years, the SR-71 flew through airspace no fighter could reach, fast, high, and untouchable. Interceptors tried, and always fell behind. Then one day, an RAF Lightning climbed differently. No chase, no theatrics, just timing and precision. And for a brief moment, it flew close enough to wave. For most of its operational life, the SR-71 Blackbird existed in a category of its own. It wasn't designed to evade fighters through maneuvering or deception. It simply flew higher and faster than anything else in the sky. When interceptors were launched, the outcome was predictable. The Blackbird would be detected, tracked, and then watched as it disappeared beyond reach. That reality shaped doctrine on both sides of the Cold War. Fighter pilots trained to intercept bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, and intruders that followed conventional profiles. The SR-71 followed none of them. At cruise, it operated at altitudes that strained airframes and engines, moving so fast that interception windows lasted seconds at best. Most attempts ended before they truly began. But the RAF Lightning was never a conventional fighter. Designed in a different era, the Lightning was built around one priority: climb. Twin engines stacked vertically, massive thrust, and an airframe optimized to reach altitude as quickly as possible. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't forgiving. But in the right conditions, it could do something few aircraft could: get high, very fast. British air defense planners understood this better than anyone. They knew chasing the SR-71 from behind was pointless. Speed alone would never be enough. Any chance of an intercept depended on geometry, timing, and prediction. The Lightning wouldn't hunt the Blackbird. It would meet it. On the day of the encounter, conditions aligned. The SR-71 was on a known route, predictable in its predictability. It didn't deviate, didn't adjust, didn't slow. That consistency was part of its strength, but it also created a narrow window, one that could be exploited if everything else went right. The RAF Lightning was launched not in response, but in anticipation. From takeoff, the profile was aggressive, full power, steep climb. Fuel consumption was extreme, margins thin. The pilot wasn't thinking in minutes but seconds. The aircraft was pushed to the edge of its envelope, climbing through thinner air where performance calculations mattered more than instinct. There was no visual contact at first, only vectors, altitude calls, calculations being refined in real time. Then, briefly, the impossible became plausible. The Lightning reached its assigned height just as the Blackbird crossed the predicted point. Not behind it, not below it, but close enough for the pilot to see the dark, unmistakable shape slicing past at the edge of the sky. It wouldn't last. It was never meant to. But for a moment measured in seconds, the gap between legend and reality closed. And that moment would become one of the most remarkable intercepts in aviation history. The moment arrived without warning or drama. There was no gradual closure, no long pursuit. 1 second, the Lightning was alone at altitude, engines straining, airframe operating at its limits. The next, the SR-71 was there, crossing the sky with a presence that felt more theoretical than real. From the Lightning's cockpit, the Blackbird didn't look like a conventional aircraft. It appeared elongated, impossibly dark against the thin blue above the clouds, moving with a kind of detached certainty. It wasn't maneuvering. It wasn't reacting. It was simply passing through. The Lightning pilot had no time to adjust course or refine positioning. The intercept geometry had already been decided minutes earlier on the ground. What remained was execution. The aircraft held its climb profile, nose slightly high, engines delivering everything they had left to give. For a brief window, the two aircraft occupied the same slice of sky, not in formation, not in pursuit, but close enough to acknowledge one another. The SR-71 crew would later confirm they saw the Lightning clearly. That alone was remarkable. Interceptors usually appeared as fleeting blips below and behind, if they appeared at all. This time, the British fighter was level, steady, and unmistakably present. The Lightning pilot did what no one expected to ever do. He raised a hand and waved. It wasn't a gesture of bravado or challenge. It was recognition, pilot to pilot, an acknowledgement of a moment that shouldn't have existed. Two aircraft built for entirely different purposes, crossing paths at the extreme edges of performance, sharing a second of mutual awareness. Then it was over. The SR-71 continued on its route, accelerating effortlessly away, its speed increasing as altitude and design allowed. There was no attempt to follow. There couldn't be. The Lightning had already reached the peak of what it could give. Fuel margins were gone. Energy states were exhausted. The British fighter began its descent almost immediately. There was no sense of failure in that moment. No frustration. The mission hadn't been to chase or engage. It had been to prove possibility. And that goal had been met. For decades, the SR-71 had represented something untouchable, a machine beyond interception, beyond challenge. The Lightning didn't change that reality, but it did something more subtle, and perhaps more important. It demonstrated that with planning, timing, and an aircraft designed for a very specific role, even legends could be met, if only briefly. The wave wasn't the point. The fact that it could happen at all was. After the intercept, there was no celebration in the air. The Lightning descended quietly, engines eased back, the aircraft transitioning from the edge of its performance envelope to something survivable. Fuel state dictated every decision now. The window had closed, and there was no reason to linger. On the ground, the significance of what had happened took longer to settle. There was no official declaration of success, no dramatic report filed with bold conclusions. In operational terms, the SR-71 had completed its mission exactly as intended. It hadn't been diverted, threatened, or delayed. By any conventional metric, nothing had changed. And yet, something had. For the RAF, the intercept became a quiet point of pride, not because the Lightning had caught the Blackbird, but because it had met it, on equal altitude, at the right place, at the right time. It validated a way of thinking about air defense that favored prediction over pursuit. For the SR-71 crews, the encounter was equally memorable. The Blackbird was accustomed to isolation. Flying above weather, above traffic, and above interception attempts created a sense of detachment from the rest of the airspace. Seeing a fighter appear alongside, even briefly, disrupted that expectation. It was a reminder that no aircraft, no matter how advanced, exists entirely outside the system around it. The story of the wave would circulate quietly among pilots and engineers. It wasn't used as propaganda. It wasn't exaggerated. In many cases, it was mentioned almost casually, as if acknowledging it too loudly might break the spell of how unlikely it had been. The Lightning itself would soon fade from frontline service, replaced by aircraft built for a different era of warfare. The SR-71 would continue flying for years, retaining its reputation as one of the most extraordinary machines ever built. But that brief encounter remained. Not as a challenge to the Blackbird's legend, but as a footnote that made it richer. Proof that even at the extremes of speed and altitude, aviation is still shaped by human judgment, timing, and intent. The wave mattered because it wasn't planned. It happened because, for a few seconds, two pilots found themselves sharing a space that engineering alone was never supposed to allow. With time, the encounter took on a quieter meaning. It wasn't remembered for altering strategy or changing the balance of air power, but for what it revealed about limits and how rarely they are absolute. The RAF Lightning was never meant to dominate the skies for hours at a time. It was a point defense interceptor designed to respond fast, climb hard, and operate at the very edge of endurance. Every successful intercept relied on ground coordination, precise timing, and a pilot willing to trust the plan completely. In this case, all three aligned. The SR-71, by contrast, represented a different philosophy. It didn't need escorts or defensive maneuvers. Its protection came from physics. Speed and altitude combined in a way that left little room for interference. It wasn't arrogance. It was design. That's why the moment mattered. The Lightning didn't expose a weakness in the Blackbird. It exposed a truth about air combat that often gets overlooked. Control isn't always about superiority in one dimension. It's about understanding the environment well enough to be present at the right moment. For British air defence, the intercept stood as a confirmation that preparation could briefly bridge even the widest performance gaps. For the SR-71 crews, it was a reminder that even the most advanced aircraft operates within a broader system of surveillance, prediction, and response. Neither side lost. Neither side escalated. The encounter ended exactly as it should have. Years later, the story still circulates not because of the aircraft involved, but because of the restraint shown by the people flying them. No challenge was issued, no message was sent. Just a wave, simple, human, and fleeting. In a conflict defined by secrecy, speed, and technology, that gesture endured. It wasn't a claim of victory. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's enough.